Stalingrad, November 1942. A Soviet rifleman from the 62nd Army is pressed into the rubble of a collapsed factory wall on the western bank of the tractor plant district. He is wearing a white winter smock over his padded telegreka, the reversible cotton and wool jacket that the Red Army had been issuing since the Finnish War. The white blends into the drifted snow that has piled across the broken concrete. He has been in this position for 4 hours. He has not moved. He has not coughed. He has scattered plaster dust across his shoulders to kill the shadow line. He has done everything the Soviet Urban Warfare Handbook taught him to do. And then, without anyone seeing him, without any German patrol working down the rubble corridor in front of him, without any scout pointing him out, a stick grenade detonates 2 meters to his left. Then another. Then a burst from an MG-42 walks across his position. He is killed where he lay. His squad mate, captured 2 days later and sent to the rear for interrogation by a German Army intelligence unit attached to the 6th Army, tells the interrogators something that will appear in different words in dozens of reports filed across the Stalingrad pocket that winter. He says, in essence, "We were not seen." It is a strange complaint from a prisoner of war. He is not claiming the Germans missed. He is claiming they found him without finding him. He had done his job. His white smock had done its job. And yet, he was dead in his rubble pile. 6 weeks earlier, the same concealment instinct crouching into ground, breaking the body's silhouette, moving only in shadow, had been killing German infantry at a frightful rate in the streets south of the central railway station. German casualties by the end of October had reached 40,000 inside the city alone, much of it lost to fire from positions the attacker never saw. The camouflage worked. The Soviets were ghosts in the rubble. The Germans were paying for it in blood. So how is it that the same ghosts against a different army suddenly stopped being ghosts? The answer is not about German eyes being sharper. It is not about German scout snipers being better trained, though they were very good. It is not even about German camouflage doctrine. The answer is about something the Soviets could not see in either sense. A different theory of what it meant to find an enemy. And to understand it, we have to go back to the moment when 2 German generals started asking a question the rest of the world thought was the wrong question. What if you didn't have to see the enemy at all? Part 1. The Invisible Men. Start with the concealment itself, because this is the piece most easily underestimated. The Soviet soldier in Stalingrad had something the German infantry doctrine had not fully prepared for: the city itself. Stalingrad in November 1942 was not a city anymore. It was a 3-dimensional labyrinth of collapsed floors, sub-basement corridors, shattered walls with firing slits at every elevation, and rubble piles that provided both concealment and cover simultaneously. The German infantry officer Joachim Wieder, captured later, and whose memoir, Stalingrad, and the responsibility of the soldier remains a primary source, wrote of the experience of advancing through the factory district as moving through a landscape where the enemy was in everything and nowhere at once. The Red Army had adapted to this landscape with remarkable speed. By October, Soviet units had developed what their own manuals called Sturmabteilgruppe assault groups, small teams of 6 to 8 men trained to use the ruins the way a forest fighter used trees. A sniper would occupy the 3rd floor of a shattered building, select a loophole in the outer wall, and fire through it at oblique angles that made muzzle flash almost impossible to locate from street level. A machine gun team would set up in a sub-basement with the barrel protruding through a hole at ground level, invisible from above, firing horizontally across rubble corridors. A rifleman would crawl into the space between 2 collapsed floor sections and fire from a gap, perhaps 30 centimeters wide. German reconnaissance photographs of Stalingrad's factory district in this period show no enemy positions at all. The terrain appears empty. The men were in it. Now, picture what this looked like from the German side. A grenadier of the 389th Infantry Division advances down a rubble corridor toward the Red October steel plant. He can see perhaps 40 meters ahead. The buildings on both sides have been bombed so thoroughly that every window, every doorway, every shadow is a potential firing point at any of 40 different elevations. A Soviet rifleman with a Mosin Nagant, wearing a white smock and lying behind a displaced concrete beam, watches the grenadier through a notch in the rubble. The German does not see him. The German cannot see him. The rubble is not concealing the rifleman, it has absorbed him. The German paid for it. By mid-November, the 6th Army had taken losses that its own staff officers described in internal memoranda as unacceptable even by Eastern Front standards. Mortar fire, sniper fire, and close-range ambushes from positions the Germans could never locate accounted for the majority of casualties in the city fighting. What the Germans had built their entire urban assault doctrine around locating the enemy, suppressing the enemy, closing with the enemy, was failing because the first step of that sequence was impossible. Part 2. The German kind of war. Understand how the German attack on Stalingrad was structured, because the structure explains the failure. The Wehrmacht's approach to city fighting in 1942 was the Sturm method, evolved from the stormtrooper doctrine of the late First World War and refined through the early campaigns of the Eastern Front. A German assault team advanced by bounds from cover to cover, with one element suppressing while another moved. Tanks were used to blast firing positions. Engineers breached walls. Infantry followed through the breach and cleared the space behind it. It was a system of methodical violence, and in open terrain or lightly constructed cities, it worked devastatingly well. But it was a method designed against an enemy you could locate. The suppression element needed something to suppress. The engineers needed a wall that was not already a honeycomb of concealed positions. The tanks needed a target that would reveal itself under fire. In Stalingrad, the Soviet defenders had arranged their positions specifically to deny all three. A tank firing at a window opening in a ruined factory wall might eliminate one position, or it might eliminate a hollow brick section, while the actual rifleman fired from a basement 2 meters below and 5 meters to the left of where the tank was looking. A German pioneer veteran of the factory district fighting, quoted in Anthony Beevor's Stalingrad, recalled the paralysis this produced. You could fire at a wall for an hour and not know whether you had hit anyone. You could throw a grenade through a window and still be shot from below through the floor you were standing on. This is what the Soviet concealment system was selling. It bought the Soviet rifleman a one-shot advantage. It bought the Soviet sniper a 30-second window before German eyes located the muzzle flash, and in rubble-strewn terrain, even a 30-second window was often enough to disappear entirely by changing position. Most importantly, it bought the Soviet rear commanders the time and concealment they needed to keep feeding men and ammunition through the underground passages that connected the city's sub-basement network to the Volga riverbank. The whole chain of Soviet defensive lethality depended on the frontman being invisible long enough to exhaust the German assault's momentum. Against the German Sturm method, this was almost a perfect mechanism. The Germans were not slow because they were German. They were slow because the Soviet concealment system made fast movement lethal. The fast units that tried to sprint through open rubble corridors were cut down by riflemen who had spent days selecting their fields of fire. Part 3. The Soviet kind of war. Walk back 20 years before Stalingrad to the artillery schools in Tula and the infantry academies outside Moscow. The officers there were not thinking about the Volga. They were thinking about something more fundamental. In the limited budgets of the interwar years, they were thinking about proximity. The Soviet military doctrine that emerged from the late 1920s and the 1930s drew a lesson from the First World War that was different from the lesson most armies drew. Where others concluded that firepower was decisive, the Soviets concluded that firepower at range was the problem, that the same artillery that made frontal assault suicidal also made defenders overconfident in their distance from the enemy. The solution was to eliminate the distance entirely, what the Soviets called hugging tactics, the deliberate practice of closing to within grenade range of the enemy before any assault, had a specific tactical purpose in Stalingrad. At grenade range, German artillery and air support became impossible to use. A Stuka pilot dropping ordnance on a Soviet position 10 meters from a German position would kill Germans. A German mortar crew firing on a Soviet-held building where their own men were fighting in the floor below would kill Germans. The closer the Soviet soldier got to his German counterpart, the more useless all the advantages of German firepower became. This produced a second decision, which was a weapon choice, and it was the PP-41. The PP-41 submachine gun had a drum magazine of 71 rounds and fired at a cyclic rate of approximately 900 rounds per minute. A Soviet assault group of 8 men, each carrying a PP-41, could put roughly 7,000 rounds downrange in a minute. At ranges of 10 to 30 meters, the ranges at which Stalingrad's rubble fighting actually took place, this volume of fire was catastrophically effective. The weapon was inaccurate at distance. In a room clearance situation, at the end of a basement corridor, in the space between 2 collapsed floor sections, accuracy was irrelevant. Volume was everything. The third decision was tactical, and it had a specific name in Soviet doctrine, Razvedka boyem, reconnaissance by combat. The practice of sending small assault groups forward, not to achieve a specific objective, but to provoke a reaction, to force the enemy to reveal his positions by firing, and then to use those revealed positions as targets for the follow-on assault. Where the German method required identification before suppression before assault, the Soviet method used the assault itself as the identification tool. Think about what this meant from the German side. You are a grenadier in a prepared position inside a ruined factory building. You have been in this position for 2 days. Your field of fire covers the main rubble corridor. You are invisible. And then a 6-man Soviet assault group sprints across the open space in front of your position, firing PP-41s at nothing in particular, throwing grenades at probable positions, making noise, making themselves targets. You fire. They have found you. The ones who survived the sprint radio back your position. 40 minutes later, a Soviet assault group comes through the wall behind you. The Germans in the interrogation logs recorded this again and again. Surprise at the recklessness of Soviet tactical approaches. Surprise that units would accept enormous casualties simply to locate a defended position. Surprise that the assault that followed was so fast that there was no interval in which to reinforce or relocate. The German camouflage worked. The German concealment held, and the Soviets attacked through it anyway, absorbing the cost of the discovery as a tactical expenditure. Part 4. The weapon that didn't need eyes. But the small arms picture was only half of it. The other half was operating at a scale no German concealment was designed to defeat. The Soviet artillery system across the Volga was not, in November 1942, a precision instrument. It was a blunt one, and the Soviets had spent the entire autumn making it blunter, heavier, and more methodical in a very specific way. The key was the Katyusha multiple rocket launcher, the BM-13, and the centralized fire direction structure that General Vasily Chuikov's 62nd Army had built around it by October. The Katyusha was accurate only in the sense that its rockets, fired in salvos of 16 to 48, saturated a defined area. It was wildly inaccurate against any individual target. But a single salvo could deliver more explosive into a 400 square meter area than a company of German mortars could deliver in 30 minutes of sustained fire. The Soviets' insight was that this weapon's inaccuracy was irrelevant if the target was not a point, but a zone. In Stalingrad's rubble, German-held buildings were zones, factory floors were zones, rubble corridors were zones. A Katyusha salvo didn't need to know where the sniper was inside the factory. It needed to know which factory. And then there was the artillery fire direction system that General Chuikov had improvised along the Volga's western bank. Soviet forward observers, korektivshiki, were placed inside the ruins, sometimes within 50 meters of German positions, with radio links back to the artillery batteries on the eastern bank. An observer who could not see the German position directly because it was in a sub-basement, because it was behind a collapsed wall, could nevertheless give a grid coordinate and an elevation adjustment. The battery on the eastern bank did not need to see the target. It needed a grid square. The rest was mathematics. In the fighting for the tractor plant in October, Soviet artillery fired over 400 fire missions in a single week, many of them directed at positions their observers could only estimate from sound, from movement patterns, from the direction of German fire. The German defenders in their prepared positions were no less concealed than they had been on the first day. Their concealment had simply become irrelevant. The shells didn't care about their concealment. The shells cared only about where their bodies were in relation to a 4-digit coordinate. And there was one more layer. By November, the Soviets had positioned anti-tank guns along the Volga bank in direct fire roles, not to kill German tanks, but to shoot point-blank into the ground floor windows of German-held buildings. At a range of 300 to 800 meters, a 45mm or 76mm anti-tank round fired directly into a window opening eliminated whatever was behind that window. No concealment, no camouflage, no rubble pile protected you from a round fired horizontally at the specific hole in the wall you were using as a firing port. Now, stack this on top of everything else. The PP Sesh 4-1 and Razvedka Boyem, reconnaissance by combat. Katyusha, saturating grid squares. Forward observers directing artillery from inside the ruins themselves. Anti-tank guns, engaging building interiors directly. The German soldier, in his carefully prepared rubble position, the beneficiary of everything Soviet urban adaptation had produced, was facing an enemy whose theory of finding him did not require finding him at all. The Soviet system didn't have to see the concealed man. It only had to know the concealed man was somewhere in a defined area. The fire would do the rest. Part 5. Why the Germans could not explain it. So we come back to the question. Why couldn't German soldiers explain how Soviet units found them through concealment that worked in open terrain, in other cities, in every previous engagement of the Eastern Front? The answer has nothing to do with Soviet eyes being sharper. It has nothing to do with Soviet scouts being better trained. It has everything to do with a fundamental conceptual mismatch. The German defensive doctrine, brilliant as it was in operational terms, was designed to defeat one specific act, the act of being seen. The Wehrmacht in 1942 conducted that act constantly. They scanned, they patrolled, they called in air support against identified targets. Their entire engagement loop ran through human eyes locating an enemy and then a fire team or a Stuka suppressing that enemy from a safe distance. When Soviet concealment broke that loop, when the men couldn't be seen, German lethality at close range stalled. The Soviet system at Stalingrad was not built on that loop. It was built on the assumption that in most urban engagements, the enemy would not be seen at all. So, the doctrine treated location in space, not visibility, as the operational problem. Where is the enemy in the sense of which building, which floor, which corridor? Once the Soviets had an address, the rest was procedure. Saturate the address with rocket fire, send an assault group through the address directly, direct an anti-tank gun at the address's windows. The enemy could be wearing white winter camouflage in a perfectly constructed rubble hide, and it would not matter, because the camouflage was a property of the man, and the Soviet answer to the man was directed at the address. The German soldiers in the interrogation logs return again and again to a word: unbegreiflich, incomprehensible. From inside their model, what was happening was incomprehensible. Their model required visibility to precede death. Death was preceding visibility. Their world had been turned upside down. And it had been turned upside down, not by a weapon, but by a different idea of what it meant for an army to know where the enemy was. The German idea was deterministic. See the enemy, then kill the enemy. The Soviet idea at Stalingrad was probabilistic. Know the address, apply enough fire to the address, and accept that some percentage of the killing would be blind. Both were correct inside their own assumptions. Only one was correct inside the rubble of the tractor plant district in November 1942. Verdict. Here is the forensic verdict on the German soldier in the ruins. He did not fail. His camouflage did not fail. His training did not fail. The theory of warfare he had been raised on failed. And it failed in a specific way against an opponent who had decided, by desperation and necessity rather than doctrine, that finding the enemy first was an obstacle to lethality rather than a precondition of it. There is a final irony. The Germans who suffered in the open campaigns of 1941 understood their losses. They were losses inside a shared framework. Both sides agreed on the rules of finding, fixing, and destroying. The Soviets were simply better at surviving that process. The Soviets, who killed most efficiently at Stalingrad, fought a war the Germans did not understand. The losses they inflicted were losses outside the shared framework. The Germans were not better or worse at the Soviet game. They were not playing it. That is the answer. German soldiers could not explain how Soviet units found them through concealment that had worked everywhere else, because the Soviet units at Stalingrad were not finding them in any sense German doctrine recognized. The Germans had prepared the perfect hide. The Soviets had simply stopped looking for it. Bring back the rifleman from the opening. He is in his rubble position on the tractor plant perimeter. He is wearing his white winter smock. He has done everything correctly. And the Katyusha salvo falls across his grid square because 3 blocks back, a Soviet observer with a map reference has called fire onto a building that probably has someone in it. The building is the target. The man is incidental. The building will be saturated regardless of whether the man inside it has been identified. He will die without being seen. He could not explain it. We can. The explanation is that he was facing an army that had stopped asking his question. The Soviet army at Stalingrad did not want to know where each German was. It only wanted to know where each German might be, and to deliver enough fire that the difference no longer mattered.